I've chosen this story tonight because baseball season's right around the corner, along with Wrigleyville. And also the story has now been anthologized in this book, Suicidally Beautiful. If anybody's interested, it'll be in the bookstores this month, I think. And I got a couple copies myself. Before I start, I want to make an announcement. This story may not be appropriate for younger, more sensitive listeners or suicidal Cubs fans. It's entitled, The Year the Padres Won the Pennant. One summer, many years ago, before any of the other clubs realized what was happening, the Chicago Cubs finished on top of the Eastern Division of the National League. Even more surprising, they were favored to defeat their Western Division opponents, the San Diego Padres, in the best-of-5 playoff series. Certainly, every Cubs fan viewed the playoffs as a lock, a minor hurdle for their team on their way to a classic confrontation with the Detroit Tigers in the World Series. And I was astonished when my wife, Dana, whom I assumed had been successfully transplanted from San Diego, revealed an unexpected affection for her home team. The Art Institute Lions are wearing Cubs caps, I announced, as the city prepared for the games. The Picasso, too. That's disgusting, said Dana. You know, there might be some people in this town who don't consider the Cubs the greatest thing in the world since sliced bread. Only someone from Southern California, I said, would think that sliced bread was great. Dana was about to reply, but restrained herself. The following night, however, she could not contain her anger when a TV commentator began to assess the Cubs' chances against Detroit. "They've got to beat the Padres first, you asshole!" she shouted at the screen. "Oh, only a minor technicality," I said. "Oh, you're just like everyone else in this town. You don't know a thing about the Padres because you've closed your mind to everything else but those stupid Cubs. I never before thought Chicago was Bush, but I understand now why they call you the Second City." This time, I was the one who bit his tongue. Dana and I occasionally quibbled over sports, but usually we confined our arguments to what was going on between the foul lines. Now, however, we seemed intent on introducing extraneous issues, and on the eve of the playoffs, I could not prevent myself from mentioning that a quarter of the Padres' pitching staff were members of the John Birch Society. "So what's your point?" asked Dana. I suppose the Cubs are all registered Democrats? My point is only that a Southern Californian, and only a Southern Californian, could stomach a team like the Padres. She didn't back off this time. "You know, I'm just about fed up with you always hitting on California. We've been married for almost 6 years, and I don't think a day has gone by without you putting down the West Coast. It wouldn't be so bad if it were just with me, but at least you could have the sense to keep your trap shut when you're with my family." "Oh, what's the matter?" I said. "Your old man doesn't appreciate the Jew in the family shooting off his mouth?" Her face turned red, and I realized I had again entered forbidden territory. In our first years of marriage, Dana rarely took issue with anything I said about her parents. As a teenager, she had fled to Ann Arbor to escape what she called their rampant materialism, and after graduating from Michigan, she settled in Chicago, where we were married. But in recent years, she seemed intent on drawing closer to her parents. And even though her trips home usually only aggravated family wounds, her face now turned red with shame whenever I complained about my in-laws, as if I were contributing to her failure to revive a bond that, as far as I could tell, had never existed in the first place. It hurts when you say stuff like that, Dave, and sometimes I think you push Mom and Dad into it. For instance, at their 40th, it was such a glorious day, and still you had to find something to fuss over. Such fine weather, you said, made Southern Californians complacent. What we needed was some good Midwestern slush to make us a little more human. Well, just then I knew exactly what my mom was thinking. The same thing she was thinking the previous day when you griped about suntans or defense contracts. "Why," she asked, "do Jewish people have to be so negative?" "Well," I said, "we were kicked out of the promised land for 2,000 years. And yet act so superior. Still, we are the chosen people." Anyway, that's what she was thinking, and I'm beginning to suspect there's some truth in it. What? The dark, negative Jew versus the blonde, positive Aryan? I suppose the Nazis had it right after all. Is that where your mother's coming from? I didn't mean Jews in general, Dave. I meant you. You're the negative one. You're the superior one. And my mother's not a Nazi. She was probably right, and I apologized. Look, let's go to bed, I said, and I kissed her on the cheek. But I was already asleep by the time she joined me there. One of my coworkers brought a TV into the office for the first game. When the leadoff batter for the Cubs homered, I couldn't resist calling Dana. Perhaps I wanted to bring our difference of the previous night back into perspective, a harmless rivalry over home teams. Hey, hey, I cried as soon as she picked up the phone. You're being childish, Dave. But that's what it's all about, Dana. We should be childish, not take everything so seriously. An explosion of cheers resounded from the TV, and I called out to our publicity manager. What happened? Sarge just belted another one into the park. Hey, hey, I yelled back into the phone, mimicking the triumphant cheer of Jack Brickhouse, a former Cubs announcer. The line was dead. The Cubs won that first game 13-0, behind Rick Sutcliffe, the best pitcher in baseball that year. They won the second game, too, and when they traveled to San Diego, they needed only one victory out of the next 3 to wrap the playoffs up. Look at the headline on this paper. World War III wouldn't get a treatment like this. You're always saying San Diego's backwater, but I don't think I've ever seen such provincialism in all my life. I was ready for her this time. Well, you have to understand, Dana. The Cubs are much bigger than Chicago. They're broadcast over WGN, and WGN is picked up all over the country. More than any other ball club, the Cubs are America's team. In that case, said Dana, I'm for the Tigers in the series. Oh, giving up on your Padres already? The Tigers, she said, glaring at me as if she herself were a jungle cat ready to pounce. And I knew then that the tension between us would not slacken until the last out of the season had been made. The Padres won the first game in San Diego, the Cubs playing as if they expected victory to fall right into their laps. And as I watched, an uneasy premonition migrated into my stomach. They'll go with Sutcliffe Sunday, I said. Oh, that's ridiculous, Dana. Oh, excuse me. They'll go with Sutcliffe on Saturday, I said. That's ridiculous, said Dana. They'll save him for Sunday. No. You're the one who's being ridiculous, Dana, and here's why. But she turned away, refusing to listen to my reasoned argument. The next morning, Jim Fry, the Cubs manager, announced that he would rest Sutcliffe, saving him for the 5th game on Sunday should it be necessary. Stupid! 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 They should go with him today! But before I could defend my position, Dana arose. I don't want to hear any more. What do you know about it anyway? What did I know about it? While she was still in diapers, I was calculating ERAs and slugging percentages, and I could still recite the opening day lineups for every Cubs team from 1965 to 1969. What did I know about it, indeed? Well, maybe I don't know anything, I said, but you should have the sense to realize that our idiot manager just handed your team momentum on a silver platter. Well, why don't you call him up and tell him about it then? In the meantime, I won't be here to see how right you really are. I've got to go into work, and I won't be home until late. Good, I said. And after she slammed the kitchen door shut, I swept the dishes off the table, leaving them on the floor for her return. I then invited myself over to Peter's house to watch the game with him and Michaela. Peter Lipschitz and his wife both had roots in Chicago predating Mrs. O'Leary's cow, and I could count on them to travel with me to Wrigleyville for the celebration that was sure to erupt outside the empty stadium once the Cubs won. On the other hand, should my doubts about Fry's pitching rotation prove correct, I would need the sympathy only fellow sufferers could provide. None of us, however, could have foreseen the agony that was to come as Steve Garvey, whom we all despised for his smug Southern Californian brand of cockiness, drove in 5 runs, the final 2 with a homer, to win the game in the bottom of the 9th. Before he even rounded the bases, the phone rang. It's for you, said Michaela. Dana. And she handed me the phone. Don't say it, I said. Hey, hey. Her voice was flat, and instead of joy or enthusiasm, it conveyed only arrogance and spite, as if Garvey had homered primarily to vindicate her. I hung up, and then I invited Peter and Michaela over to our house for the deciding game the next afternoon. Fortunately, they accepted, for I doubted I could endure the pressure without sympathetic company. In fact, had I the power to cancel the game, declare an armistice that would enable both teams to abandon the field with their honor intact, I would have used it without hesitation. Peter and I sat drinking until after midnight, trying to convince one another that the Cubs of '84 were a different breed than the team that had folded in '69. When I finally decided to leave, Peter raised his fist into the air. "Sutcliffe," he declared. "Sutcliffe," I repeated, praying that Fry had been right. I entered our house through the back door, noticing that the kitchen floor had been cleared of the mess I had left. As I ventured into the bedroom, I could hear Dana rustling beneath the covers. "You asleep?" I asked. "No," she said. "You know what I need tonight?" I said, swaying slightly, clutching the bureau for support. "It's almost morning. I'd like to make love to you, but perhaps I had drunk too much, for my appeal was edgy, demanding, and Dana probably suspected that the purpose of my desire was not to give her pleasure." "The hell with that," she said. And when she covered her head and turned her back on me, I grabbed a blanket from the closet, and what was left of the night I slept away on the living room couch. Peter and Michaela arrived the next day, looking as if they had been summoned to their own executions. Apparently, they shared my dark premonitions, and although they tried to disguise their fears, we knew that our Cubs were doomed. It was apparent from the first inning that Sutcliffe didn't have his stuff, but we still watched in fascination and horror, as if we were witnessing from afar an express train hurtling toward a collapsed bridge, powerless to stop it, yet unable to avert our eyes from the impending disaster. Late in the game, when all hope was gone, and Steve Garvey emerged from the dugout for his final bat, I observed that a fastball between the eyes would not be an unwelcome sight. "I'd really like to see that," I said. "Wipe that surfer smugness right off that tan mug of his." Peter and Michaela nodded grimly in assent. Dana, however, who was sitting huddled in one corner of the couch, her arms wrapped around her legs, her chin on her knees, suddenly, like a spring held compressed for too long, unwound, and with her lips now almost touching my ear, she said, "You know, Dave, you're a real bastard. I never realized until this week what a fucking ignorant bastard you really are." Dana rarely used such language, and even though the bitterness in her voice was almost palpable, neither of my two friends seemed to have heard her. They were too stunned by what had happened on the screen to notice that our marriage had been crumbling, along with the Cubs' chances to win their first pennant in 40 years. The divorce was an amicable one. And although Dana took a position in her agency's LA office shortly thereafter, we always had lunch together when she was in town. In fact, I was one of the first to hear about her engagement to her boss, a widower with 2 children. I congratulated her. "Is he a sports fan?" I asked. "He hates sports," she said, "at least the spectator kind. He's fond of skiing, though, and he loves ballet." "Ballet seems safe enough," I said. And I wished her the best, sincerely hoping that she and her new husband would never stumble into one of those subterranean byways from which a man and a woman could hardly emerge together unscathed. The series, incidentally, went to the Tigers in 5, just as I had predicted. Thank you.